So today we are going to be doing something slightly different for my channel, which is going to be the fantasy romance reader tag. Now, it has been a hot minute since I've done a book tag on my channel. I used to do Tag Tuesday every week, but that was a long time ago. But this is one that was created by Hannah Blackwell, and I actually found out that Hannah tagged me in this video, so I have officially been tagged. But this is a video that I saw on Rachel from Ravenhaired Readers channel, and Aaron from Booked and Busy actually texted me and told me to do it. So you know what, Aaron, I'm doing it for you. But if you guys are looking for fantasy romance content, would definitely recommend Rachel from Ravenhaired Reader. She has great recommendations. She vlogs like pretty much, I'm not sure if it is weekly, but she vlogs a lot, and I don't know about you guys, but my favorite content to watch is vlogs, and she's definitely become one of my kind of like go-to fantasy romance channels. But today there are 12 questions in this tag. I am only going to be doing 11 because the 12th is to tag some people, and I truly just don't know who has done this. So if you want to do it, the questions will be in my description box. Knock yourself out. So there are 11 questions that I'm going to be answering, and the purpose of this tag is just to, I guess, get to know me through fantasy romance and what kind of fantasy romance I like to read, my favorite characters, and that kind of thing. So the first question is a super simple one, or is it? Actually, that is the question. But it is, what book got you into fantasy romance for the first time? Now, the reason why I find this to be a little bit more complicated, I have pulled a book for it, and what I'm going to try not to do throughout this video is to ramble my way through all of the answers, because y'all know a girl doesn't know how to be concise. But there are many things that led me to fantasy romance as a genre, and if we're talking about my very first introduction to it, I guess as a concept, it was Twilight when I was 13, and that is paranormal romance, which is kind of like a genre that is adjacent to fantasy romance, but I would say it was definitely my first step on this path. After that, throughout my teenage years, I was reading a lot of contemporary romance. When I got a little bit older, I then got into, I think this was like my very late teens, like 18 to 22. I was reading things like The Mortal Instruments by Cassandra Clare, Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. So not fantasy romance again, but YA fantasy where there is a very strong romantic plot line in there. And then in 2015, I read what I would consider my first official fantasy romance book, which is of course A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I would be very surprised if this is not the series that is the answer for the majority of people. I read this when it was first released, and it completely blew me away and became my favorite book then and there. I do have other favorites now, but ACOTAR will always have a very fond place in my heart. This one, as we all know, is a fae romance, and it's about a young woman called Feyre who accidentally kills a fae wolf shifter. Well, she kind of knows that she's doing it, or thinks that she might be doing it, but she isn't 100% sure it's a fae wolf shifter. But the girl's just trying to feed her family, and very shortly after, a fae from the fairylands comes to take Feyre's life in place of the life that she took. So she thinks that this means that she's going to die, but she is actually destined to live out the rest of her life in the fairylands. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. The series has a lot of evolution from this point, but that is kind of like your starting point. And I just became obsessed. When I was going into my late teens is when I started getting into fantasy, and I quickly identified that I do like fantasy, but I still very much like romance. Like, I've always liked romance. So the combination, I would say the 50-50 combination of romance and fantasy really did it for me. And it was a few years after that that I kind of delved into it. It was 2020 when I started to look into fantasy romance as its own genre. Up until that point, I was looking for fantasy romance, but I didn't realize that it was quite such a expansive genre when you got to like indie books and Kindle Unlimited. But I did discover that in 2020, and the rest is history. The second question is, if you could pick one fantasy world to move to for the rest of your life, which one would you pick? And this one is a very difficult one for me because realistically fantasy worlds are quite dangerous. I was looking through specifically the fantasy romance books that I have on my shelves that I've read, and in terms of the worlds, aside from ACOTAR, there's not many that are all that appealing. They're all kind of grim. I read some like fantasy romance that tips towards dystopian. There's also a bunch that are just like super dangerous with like warring kingdoms. They're not looking after the common people. Everyone's starving and dying, and that's just not the vibe. So I went for a little bit of a cop-out answer actually, because I mean, you know, we could go with ACOTAR. That would be perfectly valid. I just don't want to answer Sarah J Maas for every question. I mean, I completely could, but I'm trying not to. So my cop-out answer is The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling, and the reason why this is a cop-out is because it is set in our world, like it's set in a contemporary setting, but the setting of this is a spooky little town that is very much kind of like Salem, Massachusetts, or the town in Halloween Town, where they have a very spooky vibe. Like Halloween business is booming. One of the characters in here has like a witchcraft, like a witch's shop or like a magic shop, where she sells souvenirs and trinkets, but like it's actually owned by a witch. So I think that that kind of like spooky little town where it's always Halloween, where there's always something spooky going on, would really do it for me. So yeah, it's a cop-out because it's not a fantasy world, but it's a setting in a fantasy romance. I mean, in terms of fantasy romance, this one is very much in the vein of like a contemporary romance with a little fantasy twist, but we're counting it. Question number 3 is, if you could marry one bookish hero or heroine, who would it be? And you know, this one was hard because I'm not a fussy gal, you know, I don't like to play favorites, but one that I would marry is Colith from the Fortuna Swan series. Now, the reason why Colith in particular is because he's a little bit of a sad boy. I feel like he needs someone to love him, someone to take care of him. I feel like I could really uplift him. He's had a lot of disappointment in his life. A lot of people he's loved have been very mean to him, and I could change that for him. You know, I could really uplift him in the way that he needs to be the most badass king of the Unseelie Court, and I also would love to be the queen of the Unseelie Court, so that would also be like a pretty cool benefit. Question number 4 is, if you could be any fantastical creature or magical being, what would you be? This was hard, but I feel like I would quite like to be a siren. There's a couple of reasons for this. One very important one is I like the idea of luring men to their doom. That is very appealing to me. But also I really like water, but I don't like to swim. And a big part of being a siren, I feel, is, you know, just like casually draping yourself across a rock, kind of a little bit in the water, but like sunning yourself. I love sunbathing, but when I'm in water, I kind of like to just like laze and float around. And I feel like a big part of being a siren is doing that. And then of course there is the cool power of like luring men to their doom. That's pretty badass in my opinion. Question number 5 is, if you could kill any fantasy romance character, who would you kill? I was torn with this one. I was like, we could go for a bad guy because there's a lot of bad guys out there, but I actually would kill Seth from Zodiac Academy because I think he is a massive creep. There is a question coming later on that I was going to put Zodiac Academy in for, and I changed it, but it's like, it's no secret that I just don't get the hype with Zodiac Academy. While the concept is solid, in execution, it did absolutely nothing for me, and there is only one thing that I was even remotely interested in across the 2 books in that series I read. But one thing, like, people tell me they love Seth. By the end of the series, you love Seth. I'm not willing. I can't. I'm not willing to give that man a chance. The reason why I don't like him is because he's very touchy-feely. Like, he comes up to people like he's a wolf shifter, he's a werewolf, so his first thing is to like touch people, and he's always like rubbing on people, and I'm like, bro, just give me some space. But actually disliking Seth has led me to the conclusion that I actually don't really like wolf shifters or like werewolves, and I have noticed as I've been reading a little bit of werewolf or shifter romance that that very much is the case, because I find them all just a bit too touchy-feely and a bit too creepy. So yeah, for me, Seth would definitely have to go. Question number 6 I don't actually have an answer for, but I will tell you why. The question is, what character do you believe could be your in real life best friend? Now, 2 options immediately came to my mind for this. The first one was Fortuna from Fortuna Swan, because she is somebody who is deeply flawed, a little bit impulsive, very stubborn, but somebody who is very badass. And I don't say badass a lot, and I've said it like 3 times in this video already. But she's also somebody who cares very, very deeply for her family and the people around her, like her friends. My second option was Nesta, because Nesta is, one, deeply misunderstood, but also I'm not scared of somebody who's a little bit hostile. As somebody who people think is a little bit hostile, as somebody who's not a social bunny and doesn't just like run to make conversation with people, I feel like me and Nesta could get on. But I then thought about it a little bit, and when it comes to IRL, I actually attract water and air signs, which is wild to me because they frustrate me to no end, because I'm very much like set on my course. It takes me ages to make a decision, but when I do, like, there's no change in my mind. I'm stubborn, I'm loyal to a fault, I'm like a hard shell to crack. And when it comes to friends, it's actually the opposite of that I really get on with. Like, Pisces and Geminis are attracted to me like magnets. That being said, I can't think of any characters that fulfill that. Maybe somebody like Laurie from Fortuna Swan, who is very like flamboyant and over the top, but definitely not Fortuna and Nesta. I feel like we actually have potential to clash there, and realistically those are the characters that I identify with. So yeah, not Nesta and Fortuna, somebody a little bit more whimsical than that. Question number 7 is, what would be your fantasy weapon of choice? And this is one, once again, that I struggled with a little bit, because I play RPGs, I play MMOs, and this is a decision that I have to make regularly, and I still don't know if I found the play style for me. In my wildest dreams, I would like to dual wield daggers and wear like the full like leather assassin garb with a cloak and be like mysterious and stealthy. I'm also incredibly clumsy though, and I can't clear a door without banging my hip on it. So I'm not sure if the assassin life is for me. I do have very good hand-eye coordination, so maybe a bow and arrow is in my future. Maybe throwing knives. I don't think I have the upper body strength for swords, although that would be cool if I did. I'd like it to be a dagger, but I feel like if we're playing to my strengths, I'd be more of a bow and arrow kind of girl. Question number 8 is, who is the sexiest fantasy romance character of all time? And once again, I don't like to play favorites. I'm not fussy, but one that is incredibly sexy to me is Desmond Flynn from the Bargainer series by Laura Thalassa. So this one is a postal fantasy, so it's set partially in the real world and partially in a fairy realm. But in this one we are following a woman called Callie who has made many a bargain with the bargainer. Now most people only have one, and the bargainer always comes to collect his debts, but Callie has hundreds of black beads wound around her arm, each one representing a debt that she owes to the bargainer. And it's actually been 7 years since she saw him, but the catalyst for this book is Desmond Flynn, the bargainer, finally coming to collect all of the debts that Callie owes. So this one kind of flip-flops between the timeline that's 7 years in the past, where Desmond and Callie met and she was like accruing all of these beads, and the present day where Desmond has come to collect, and it's kind of building up to the point where he disappears for 7 years and like the reason like why and what happened and why he was gone. Desmond Flynn is not only beautiful, he also has that kind of like dark, brooding, like mystique that I really like. I have two types. One is like nerdy soft boys, and the other is like big, muscular, like brooding, moody guys. And Desmond definitely falls into the latter category. There are some great like professions of love in here as well that I really liked, and everything about Desmond to me exudes sexiness. That being said, this was like the first fantasy romance series I read after Sarah J Maas. So in hindsight, like upon reread, would this be the best thing I ever read? I don't know. But when I was very new to the genre, I liked it a lot. Also has a lot of similarities to A Court of Mist and Fury if you're looking for something to ease you into fantasy romance and you like ACOTAR. Question number 9 is the one that I originally had Zodiac Academy in for. It is pick one fantasy romance book to burn, which I gotta say is a little harsh. Like I said, Zodiac Academy, not for me. Would probably happily burn it, or I wouldn't miss it if it had been burned. But I decided to change this out, and my answer is Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is a I don't know if I ended up giving it 3 stars. Essentially the end, the last 50, 60 pages, 5 stars. The rest, a 1 or a 2 star. And the reason why I would burn this in particular, like this book in particular, is because I enjoyed the Blood and Ash series until I got to this point, and I can't even face continuing now because of this book. It's too long, it's repetitive, literally scenes repeated on the next page. I think this book starts with the first 2 chapters are 2 different villain monologues from 2 different villains, and it's just not good. It's killed any desire I have to continue on with this series. I wish I'd never read it. So I would burn this one. I would wish this one out of existence or do a full rewrite on it. Question number 10 is, you can choose one fantasy romance book and it is the only book that you will ever be able to read again. So I can just read one book over and over again, and what is it? For me, that has to, it's a no-brainer really. It's my favorite book, which is House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas. I read the second book in the series, Sky and Breath, and I don't love it as much. I'm also not particularly sure about the direction that the series as a whole is going in, but before I read House of Sky and Breath, I reread this, and this hit even harder the second time around. So this one is an adult urban fantasy romance following a girl called Bryce Quinlan, who is half fae, and she is called in by the Archangel of Crescent City to investigate a string of murders. They previously thought they'd already locked away this killer, but it seems that he started killing again. So Bryce is drafted to help catch the killer because it is believed that she may have a personal connection to them, and because this is an extremely dangerous task, she is assigned the fallen angel Hunt Athalar to assist her. This one is a slow one as well, so I feel like it has plenty of content to get me through the rest of my life. It has points of high emotion. There's a lot about like trauma, healing, grief, and recovery in here. There's two broken humans who have given up essentially and are learning how to piece back together their lives. We also have elements of found family in here, which I love. We have generally just great friendships, actual family, like sibling bonds that I thought were done well in here. Not that I can relate because I'm an only child. I feel like it shows as well. For sure would reread this over and over again. I mean, I already am going to be rereading it at the end of this year, ready for the third book in the series, and I imagine I will reread it in the future, even though I didn't love the second book and I may not like the third very much. The first book is still my favorite book of all time. It does not tarnish my enjoyment of this book, so I feel like this one is definitely the right choice. And the final question, question 11, is if you could recommend one fantasy romance book to somebody who is new to the genre and trying to get into it, what would it be? I think that everything that I've spoken about today, all of the series that I've spoken about today, would be very good for beginners to the genre. I don't think I've necessarily read anything that is too difficult in fantasy romance. I also think it very much depends where you're coming from. Like if you were telling me I want to read fantasy romance, I'm a YA reader, I would recommend you something different than if you said I want to get into fantasy romance, I'm a contemporary romance reader. I do have a lot of fantasy romance recommendation videos. I think I've got 4 or 5 on my channel, and they're also all in a playlist which I will link for you guys if you want to check that out. But if I just had to pick one, I decided to mention one that I haven't spoken about today. It is a little bit on the darker side, but it's not the darkest fantasy romance I've read, and that is Guild by Raven Kennedy. I feel like if you have entered into the genre through like Sarah J Maas and you're looking to explore some more of the indie stuff, then I feel like this would be a good starting point. It is a King Midas retelling, but it does have a twist, and we're following a girl called Auron who has been gold touched by King Midas. She is his prized possession, she lives in a gilded cage, and she is in love with him. Now she is actually also very happy with her captivity because she used to live on the streets when she was younger, and she has faced some pretty terrible things because of that. Midas is actually looking to further his standing in the world and claim a new territory. So when he sets off to do that, he takes all of his prized possessions with him, including Auron, and along the way something goes terribly wrong, which kicks off the chain of events for this series. Now this is one that is like ACOTAR in terms of the starting place of the series is very different to where we are a little bit later on, and it's hard to like, I can't really explain what this is actually about without spoilers. There is an element of fae in here, so I would classify this as a fae romance, and I enjoyed the ride of this one and seeing where it would go. I'm currently 3 books into this series. Of the 3 that I've read, the 3rd one is the best, and I need to get around to the 4th with the 5th one coming out later this year. But like I said, do check out my other fantasy romance recommendations video because it very much depends. If you're looking to get into the genre, you don't know where to start, it very much does depend on what your reading background currently is of where I would recommend you actually start. So that was the fantasy romance reader tag. Thank you very much to Hannah Blackwell for creating this one. If you want to check out Hannah's channel, it will be linked down in the description, along with Rachel from Ravenhead Reader and also Aaron from Booked and Busy, who told me to do it. So yeah, down in the comments, oh my god, it's been such a long time since we've done a tag video. Down in the comments, let me know if you could recommend recommend one fantasy romance book to a reader that was new to the genre and wanted to try it, what would it be? And then anybody who is looking for recommendations can head down into the comments to find them. But aside from that, guys, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you wanna. Do head to my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish Kindle website, the Etsy for that, and a 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.